Welcome right now. I'm not even going to take our little sound intro. I'm not even going to do our little jingle right now. We are going right to the man of God that's joining us here on Interstellar Realities Radio. And again, I don't want to take up one more second of his time. So, Brother Tom Horn, it is a true honor to have you here tonight. And how are you doing, my friend?
Hey, I'm doing very well, and thank you so much. And man alive, all those accolades. I mean, I was just getting lower and lower in my chair here the more you were talking. But thanks for having me on the program. One correction that I would make, we just recently changed the web page. RaidersNewsUpdate.com is now SkywatchTV.com. So if a person goes to RaidersNewsUpdate.com, they'll just see an ad there to click on it to follow it over to SkywatchTV.com. We had to produce a new website because, well, for a lot of reasons. One, because Raiders News Update was built on an old frames-based system, and more, as you know, people today are using all kinds of smart devices and tablets and smartphones, and your websites have to be mobile ready. So we had a brand new website built, but we also had that done because we just launched our own television program. As a matter of fact, tomorrow night, Tuesday, is the very first night. It's our debut on DirecTV, the Dish Network, and Glory Star. And it's going to be a pretty cool hour because you'll have Sid Roth for 30 minutes, then you'll have Prophecy Watchers, which Gary Stearman is hosting, and then you'll have Skywatch TV, which Gary Stearman is also hosting with the News Raiders team over there. And we are very, very excited about the launch of that new television program. We got some really exciting things that are coming up. And I've bet the bank. I took all my retirement and put into it, so that's how much faith I have in it. I just know that God put us on this mission, and we're excited to be doing it. And to talk about the kind of stuff that I'm on your program to talk about tonight. Everything from disclosure to what's going on with the Pope to Zenith 2016 to whatever it is you want to talk about.
Well, and Brother Tom, I want to ask you so much, and I know Tom is limited tonight. I hope we can talk a little bit about the CERN and get your thoughts on that huge atom smasher buried under the ground over there in Switzerland and France. I'd love to get your thoughts on how close we are to official disclosure, and I'd love to get your latest impressions of what is happening in the Vatican and the itinerary of the Pope this year and your analysis of that. I was listening to the Hagman and Hagman report maybe in the last month even, and you was given 3 major things to keep our eye on. I actually repeated those things, I believe, to the church not long after that. But I was hoping to launch this interview tonight just by asking you about the year 2016. Oh, and just before we go any further, what you just said about that the TV show that's coming out and the lineup that you just gave, Sid Roth, to Brother Gary Stearman, to yourself and your own program, I mean, that has to be on everybody's DVR. I mean, if you can't get to the TV to watch it, ladies and gentlemen, DVR that thing, TiVo it. I'm telling you, this is a critical hour we're living in right now, and people need to hear this information. But back to the subject at hand. I was hoping so much to launch with the year 2016. Now, you have written a book titled Zenith 2016, and that title alone is compelling, and it gives me a natural curiosity for the book. But I guess my first question is, would you tell us about this book, Zenith 2016, and why you wrote it, and what does it mean? And I'll just sit back with the rest of the listening audience, and I'll enjoy the ride tonight.
Okay, I'm happy to do that. And one final thing about Skywatch TV and TiVo and all of that, we also are setting up a Roku channel. We've had a lot of people that have asked us to do that, so if they don't want to have to DVR the program, they'll be able to do that. And then finally, every week when the 30-minute television broadcast plays, the next day that same television broadcast will be on our website and on our YouTube channel. So if they miss something, they'll be able to see it. Now, to the subject of Zenith 2016, it's very curious because this goes back, you're actually like into the mid-2000s, and there were a lot of New Agers out there that had started talking about the end of the Mayan calendar, and it's going to end in the year 2012. And I wanted to know, if there was anything to that, or why were they talking about it? Why were there so many people that were convinced that the world was going to end in 2012? And I started doing research, and I found that there was actually parts of this that the New Age community was not talking about at all, but that was really, I thought, of the utmost importance, and that is that the prophecies that they were kind of referring to from the Maya came from the Jaguar shaman, but what they weren't pointing out was that he was a convert to Christianity. As a result of the Spanish invasion and the missionaries that came in, the Mayan prophet was converted to Christianity, and when he gave forth his prophecies, he was mixing, he was upgrading Mayan thought to blend it with biblical apocalyptic literature, prophesying, talking about a final world order that would give rise to what he called two great men. Now, by the way, this was written in the Mayan language. It was in the book called the Council Book of the Yucatec Maya. It was translated into English by an academic, and in that book was where I found this jaguar referring to the year 2012. But here's what was important. They were not saying that it represented the end of the world. What they were saying was actually more interesting than that. They were saying it represented the end of an era, or what many of us evangelicals might call a dispensation in time, that was then going to give birth to a final world order. And the Jaguar shaman believed, based on their own, research of the stars and astronomical data, and for that matter, even paganism, which he was trying to Christianize, believed that what would happen in 2012 would actually just be the dawn of a final world era. Well, when I discovered that became interesting to me, and I started doing a great deal of research into this idea around 2012. I started sending emails to all of my friends that happen to be Bible scholars and prophecy experts, and also university teachers and people that I had known over the years. I pastored for 25 years, and I was an executive in the Assemblies of God for about 9 years, and I came to know an awful lot of people around the world. So I'm emailing all these people, and I'm asking them if they make anything of this, if they do they see anything in it in prophecy. And mostly I was getting back a lot of answers that were my own opinion at that time, and that it was really just a bunch of poppycock, a bunch of New Age wackoism that didn't really have anything to do with biblical prophecy. But then, all of a sudden, some dominoes started falling. And as a result of my research, I started finding that there were numerous ancient pagan societies that had, for thousands of years in some cases, and for hundreds of years in other cases, and these were societies around the world where we have no knowledge whatsoever that they would have had any capacity for communicating with one another. So independent of each other, and sometimes separated by hundreds of years or even thousands of years, they were fixating on the years 2012 to 2016. So that's what the title essentially implies, Zenith 2016, that all of these seers down through time were saying something was going to happen. So it was the Maya, it was also the Hindus and their Kali Yuga calendar. It started approximately during the Mayan fifth great cycle. It also predicted that global earth changes would begin following the year 2012. And then I found that even here in early American history, the Cherokee Indian tribe, they too had a whole series of frenzied revelations and prophecies about 200 years ago, during the 1800s, 1811 to 1812, I think. And these are in scholarly works in university. These are referred to as the Chickamauguan star constellation prophecies, but they're more commonly referred to as the rattlesnake prophecies, where the Cherokee Indian also prophesied that following the year 2012, several things were going to happen. Here's another thing, by the way, that's interesting, is that what they described from their worldview seems to parallel exactly what the Maya and the Aztec were saying on different levels, especially given what they said, that two great men are going to appear on the earth. The Maya said that too, which sound very much like the coming of the false prophet and the Antichrist between the years 2012 to 2016. This would be followed by chaos. The Chickamauga star constellation prophecies say chaos in the Pleiades. And they're talking about metaphysical chaos in the Pleiades and in the Orion constellation. And both of those constellations are connected to, on the Orion side, to Osiris, the god of the Egyptians, the Pleiades to Apollo, the god of the Greeks. And those are the two deities, of course, that are incorporated on the Great Seal of the United States of America and tied to the prophecy about the second coming of Apollo, which we also talk about. So that caused my eyebrows went up. Here's the Cherokee Indian talking from their own worldview, but referring to astronomical phenomena that is also incorporated on the Great Seal and other various prophecies that have been picked up by these different disparate organizations and cultures and societies down through time. And they saw that following the appearance of these two great men on earth, which the Maya also saw, that then their rattlesnake, their feathered serpent, their plumed serpent, would return to the earth. Well, that's exactly what the Maya and the Aztecs said. Quetzalcoatl will return, Kukulkan will return, the plumed serpent will return to the earth. So now I was starting to stack up through Mesoamerica, through the American Indian indigenous tribes and peoples around the world, that some of these from thousands of years ago, some from a couple of hundred years ago, they all focused for some reason on this period, 2012 to 2016. Then I got an email from J.R. Church before he died. And because he had been one of the guys I had emailed, I said, do you know anything about this? Do you see any connection? So finally he emails me back and he says, hey, Tom, he said, did you know that in the Zohar, which is, of course, the most important work of Jewish Kabbalah, mysticism, and for people that don't know what the Zohar is, this is a really important Jewish mystical document. It was written in medieval Aramaic about 700 years ago now, and it's got all this mystical commentary about the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah. But there is a section in the Zohar that J.R. wanted to point out to me that I'd read it, but I'd never put 2 and 2 together. And he said, Tom, open up the Zohar on your desktop. So I put on my headset. I've got J.R. Church on the phone, and I've got him wearing my headset. I open up the Torah on my computer, and he said, the Zohar, on my computer. And he says, now go to Volume 3, Section 34, which is the Ve'era section of the Zohar. And he says, now open up the subsection called the Signs Heralding Mashiach, or in English, the Coming of the Messiah. So I open it up, and he starts walking me through it, and lo and behold, right here in the Zohar, it talks about how in the year 5773, which is the Jewish calendar, in the Gregorian calendar that we find, that would be the year 2012 to 2013, because their calendar year starts in the new moon of 2012, goes into 2013. And it starts talking about how during that period of time, the Messiah, Mashiach, is going to make himself known quietly to the Orthodox priests, the people in Israel that might be behind the building of the next temple and that sort of thing, but not yet to the world, but that sometime after 2012, 2013, and before 2016, he is going to make himself known to the nations of the world. I was just beside myself about this, that we have the Maya, we have the Aztec, we have the Cherokee Indians. Now we've got Jewish priests 700 years ago naming the exact same period of time, that 2012 to 2016, something's going to happen. Then I went from there and I discovered the 800-year-old prophecies of Rabbi Judah ben Samuel, who also focused on 2012 to 2016. Then Chris Putnam and we worked together to write Petrus Romanus. We also wrote the book Exa Vaticana, and right now, in a few weeks from now, we're releasing the most powerful of the 3 books. This book's called On the Path of the Immortals, and it is literally going to shake foundations. It's the most extraordinary research. In fact, it's so big, I've sent film crews to Arizona, to the ancient Anasazi dwellings. We're going to do a 6-week televised special report. I'm going to be doing major media. I'm going to be on the Jim Baker program here this week talking about it. I mean, it's just extraordinary what the findings are. But So Chris and I were doing this research, and we get a professor from a university who hears us on a radio show, and he emails us and he says, did you know that during the turn of the century, Protestant reformers, now we're a couple of hundred years ago, he said numerous Protestant reformers focused on the year 2012 to 2016, and among them were very, very famous preachers like Jonathan Edwards. And we followed up on this, and we actually went to the Yale University, got copies of letters that Jonathan Edwards had written. We reproduced some of these in our books, in which he predicted that the Antichrist and the false prophet would appear on earth sometime between the year 2012 to 2016. But before we were done, we had actually turned up 24 volumes of books, magazines, the Theological Dictionary of Princeton University from the 1800s, all of these kind of documents in which Protestant reformers were also saying that between the year 2012 and 2016. So the reason behind the title of that book and why I had to write it was I had this avalanche of information that I suddenly had landing in my lap. And my big question was this, not whether the prophecy of the popes or any of these other prophecies, not whether they were inspired divinely or demonically, but why? That was really the big question. Why did so many cultures all around the world for so many different ages of time tend to focus on this very period that we are living in right now? We're right in the middle of it. We're in 2015. So, and then combine that with what's happening with the blood moons, 2014 and 2015. So all these different things that are happening all around the world right now just compelled me to have to write that book. And I should say one other thing, and then I'll shut up, but that book was one of the only times where I've actually had opportunity to essentially block myself out from the world, cancel all of my speaking arrangements, and spend an entire year actually thoroughly investigating a subject matter. And by the time I wrote that book, I literally had tens of thousands of pages of research information, and then I had the opportunity to take the time to write it like I wanted to. And people all over the world have said that it's my magnum opus, that it's the best book I ever wrote. And I don't know if that's true, by the way, or if I've ever even written anything that is great. But I certainly was intrigued by this phenomenon concerning these year dates and why so many cultures focused on it.
Well, Brother Tom, I tell you, as I've been working my way through Zenith 2016, I believe it's a book that everybody needs to read. I mean, just the opening, just the information in the very beginning of the book about the Founding Fathers and some of the things that it's hard to swallow at first. I mean, especially when you're raised a certain way, and I know you understand what I'm saying there, then you start discovering some of these things, and you're like, man, but it was a little while ago, before I even read Zenith 2016, that I started realizing that there was a real conflict at the beginning stages of our nation. Before the Declaration was even signed, revivals had broken out in the colony, and it's almost like we became a Christian nation in spite of the efforts of many powerful men to make us something different. It was like the revivals were breaking out in the colonies as these men of God were thundering the gospel, and it seems that is why we have the Christian heritage that we have. It's more because, and this is how I've kind of received it in my research, it's more because of the men of God that had the power, the Holy Spirit was preaching the word. And, man, this nation just went into revival around the time of the framing of the Declaration of Independence. I just found that so fascinating that there was a real spiritual battle in this country before the pen was ever put to the paper in the State House in Philadelphia.
Yeah, well, that's very astute of you. That's actually the way I typically like to phrase that, is that we became a Christian nation despite perhaps what a handful of Freemasons had intended to build here. The truth is, most of the signers of the Declaration of Independence were Freemasons, and they were committed to an occult plan that is, it's often called the Atlantean scheme. This was a vision, that was based on the works of Sir Francis Bacon, who was an English philosopher, an author, a Rosicrucian. He writes this novel, New Atlantis, that was published in the 1600s. But it portrayed a very specific utopian vision, and there were very powerful members of secret intellectual societies throughout Europe that were very committed to building a new kind of democracy based on the enlightened grandeur of ancient Atlantis as it had been described by Sir Francis Bacon. In fact, there's a Newfoundland stamp. You can look this up on Wikipedia and even see this Newfoundland stamp that is a picture of Francis Bacon on the front of it, talking about how he is the pioneer of the order that will be established here in the United States of America, because the intellectuals in Europe realized that things were too entrenched there. They were never going to be able to establish what they wanted in that country, but they looked here at the New World, America, as a place that was unimpeded by political realities entrenched in their own homeland. And you can read the writings of the Freemasons themselves. Manly P. Hall, who is widely considered Freemasonry's greatest philosopher. He was a 33rd degree Freemason, and he goes into detail about how the early founders of this country were committed to that Atlantean scheme. So that happened to be a fact, and so I typically phrase it the same way you have, that there might have been a small handful of people who were very powerful in the sense that they were in politics, and these were attorneys, and they were highly placed in various positions throughout the government. Thomas Jefferson, of course, wanted Washington, D.C. to even be based after the Roman pantheon, which was dedicated to all pagan gods. So there was a lot of that influence. But what was happening outside of those pristine halls was the Pilgrim movement, which was giving birth to a great awakening here throughout this continent. And as a result of these preachers, as you mentioned a moment ago, who were on fire for God, and people who were on fire for God, this became a Christian nation despite what some of the original founders wanted to do. And throughout the history of this nation, God has saved us from ourselves more than once. I think, frankly, we're standing again right now today at a crossroads. If you look at our relationship with the nation of Israel, if you look at our relationship with the church, if you look at the persecution that's coming upon those who are truly born again right now, who are being told that they're going to have to get in line with certain agendas, or they could have their churches taken away, or they might not have the opportunity to be able to preach, or they could get arrested, or whatever. This is happening around the world. It isn't just ISIS over there along the Euphrates River that's trying to fulfill end times biblical prophecy. There's also an institutionalized side of religion that also is aligning to persecute those who would be truly born again. But here's the upside to that story. That was also true just before every great awakening. If you go back and look at the first great awakening, second, the third, every time it looked like there was no hope, the church is dead, and what happened? All of a sudden, the fire of the gospel somehow was ignited in the hearts of young men and women who became powerful preachers, who became anointed to preach the gospel. And the Apostle Paul gives us the key for national transformation. It is not in the hands of politicians, but rather the Apostle Paul says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power, and that's the Greek word dunamein, from which we make the word dynamite. It is the explosive power of God, and that's what changes people's hearts. It won't be dominionist efforts to vote in the right person to be our champions in some political quarter, though we may have some kind of responsibility, right, for voting for moral good or voting against immorality or evil, but that's not what changes nations. What changes nations is radio programs like this and other people whose hearts are filled with the passion of the Holy Spirit and who become preachers of the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's what changed. The disciples went out from Jesus rejoicing that he had given them power over supernatural darkness. And no matter how the powers that be tried to suppress the preaching of the gospel by imprisoning them or martyring them. The more they tried, the greater the church grew, and the greater the church, the stronger the church became, until finally one day the devil said, "This isn't working," and they turned, to Constantine, who Christianized the church and gave it political favor, and that was when the power of the gospel was lost for a while. But this is really the history, the cyclical history of the world and nations, is that people forget God, they grow cold, the church becomes anemic, and then something happens. Usually it's going to be some kind of trial, war, recession, something that then puts people back on their knees, and then they start praying again, and then they become powerful again. Read the book of Judges and see that pattern over and over again. And Israel forgot the Lord their God and went whoring after this or that. And then God will allow war or judgment or whatever might come. And then what does it say? And Israel remembered the Lord their God. And they put away the high places and they tore down the groves. And then God blessed them once again. So look at where we are in the world today and the condition of the church and the persecution that is coming upon the church, and realize that we are ripe now for another great awakening. In fact, I'd love to find a really qualified author right now that I could publish through Defender Publishing House that could tell me what conditions are ripe right now for another great awakening, because I believe we could be poised for perhaps the greatest spiritual revival in the history of mankind.
Well, and I think that scares the godless sect of the government to the point where they'll lose sleep, because that's one thing that Capitol Hill doesn't have an answer for. There's no backup plan. There's no contingency. I mean, if a real, true revival breaks out, that tips the scale, doesn't it, Brother Tom?
Absolutely. There you go. That's what changes the hearts of man. True revival, true preaching, authoritative preaching.
Absolutely, and it's just I just want to talk about so much. I was reading a headline, just switching gears here. We touched on Zenith 2016. It's 10:30. We're on the East Coast here in blogtalkradio.com/interstellar realities. I'm about just bouncing off the walls to have Brother Tom Horn on this show tonight. I can't even hardly contain myself, and I got so many things to talk to him about. So let's just switch gears here, and let's talk about this Hadron Collider, this atom smasher that they have fired up again as of Friday the 13th. Interestingly enough, and there's all sorts of speculation about this. What do you know about this, Brother Tom? And does it have any correlation with the Tower of Babel in some way?
Yeah, well, let me talk about that. First of all, I should make everybody understand that I'm not even a theoretical physicist, let alone a physicist, so I'm not qualified to talk about it much of the scientific side of the Large Hadron Collider. I also need to let you know I have another program that I have to do in about 25 minutes from right now, too. But here's it's always, for me, it's always the metaphysical. We were talking a moment ago about, or I mentioned a moment ago, the prophecy that's on the Great Seal of the United States of America, which was borrowed from the Cumae Sibyl's Novus Ordo Seclorum prophecy involving the return of Apollo at the end of time, who would give birth to this new golden age that I think the Maya and everybody else were looking forward to. But how many know that Apollyon, the destroyer, is actually related to CERN, the Large Hadron Collider? And how so? Because CERN is located, as you mentioned a little bit ago, there on the borders of France. And it's located in an area that's called Saint-Genès-Pouilly. This is a township, actually, in eastern France, on the border of Switzerland, which you mentioned. And it's nestled there in the foothills of the Jura Mountains, Lake Geneva. But this Pouilly, this is an area that had been first established by the Romans, and it was named Apolliacum. Apolliacum, taken from Apollo, and this served as literally a location for a temple to the god Apollo or Apollyon, who's listed in the book of Revelation as belonging to the king of the hybrid fallen angel creatures. In fact, I was just now, as you were talking, I was trying to find some notes that I had been making earlier today, which I wished I could find now and can't. But today I was reading Revelation 9 again, and you know how it talks about Revelation 9:13, the sixth trumpet blows and the angels are released from the great river Euphrates. Now, why is that important? Because that's the very area that the Islamic nation is operating in right now. The Euphrates, runs from the mountains of western Turkey down through Syria, Iraq, the Persian Gulf, and so the literal stomping grounds right now of ISIS, who are very much apocalyptically driven. They want the armies of Rome, to meet them in Dabiq. That's any kind of an infidel army. That might be the United States and coalition forces. They're trying as much as they can by beheading on television and all those things they're doing to outrage the nations of the world, to draw them into a battle because it's part of their apocalyptic belief system. They believe, like we Christians talk about Megiddo and Armageddon, and this is going to come at the end of a tribulation period when God intervenes on behalf of the Jewish nation and destroys the armies of Antichrist. But in the Muslim Islamic faith, the Sunni and Shia faith, that's reversed. That's what happens first, and it happens in Dabiq. That's why they've named their magazine Dabiq, that they're going to enrage all the nations, and then the nations are going to gather together in Dabiq, where they're going to be slaughtered somehow, either by nuclear bomb or whatever it is they're going to do. They're going to wipe them out, and then their caliphate's going to swing spread across the earth. Ultimately, this is all going to result in the return of their, first the Dajjal, which is their version of the Antichrist, and then their Mahdi. And, of course, Jesus Christ, they say, is also going to come back, and he's going to spear the Dajjal and help the Mahdi to, let this righteous army sweep over the world. But today, I was reading about this. I thought, man, the very grounds, what is the chance that the very grounds that ISIS right now are operating in is from the book of Revelation, the 6th chapter, but it's the 5th, the 9th chapter, 1 through 12, but it is the 5th trumpet, the one that blows before these angels are released from the great river Euphrates. That's where a mighty angel, having a key in his hand, comes down to the earth, and he opens the pit, and inside the pit, this horrific horde of locusts, transgenic locusts, come up out of the earth to torture the inhabitants of the earth. But it's there that it says that they have a king over them who is Apollyon, or as this ancient town here, which today is called St. Genus Poeli, where CERN was built, was known as Apaliacum. This is literally an area where an ancient belief existed that this might be the place where the pit would open at the end of time. So of all places on the earth, why in the world would they have gone there where the demon destroyer, it was believed, would come up out of this abyss when it was unsealed? And then not only do they do that, they go there and they build the Large Hadron Collider, the CERN Collider, and then they put right out in front of it the Hindu version of the destroyer god, the Shiva, which destroys at the molecular level and then puts it back together again. So now you mentioned the Tower of Babel. It is said that one of the possible locations for the Tower of Babel was actually directly over the presumed location of the Abzu, or the abyss. And the question is whether Nimrod was actually trying to unleash the locusts in defiance of God's ultimate timing. You said you're going to have Dr. Michael Lake on your program here pretty soon. You could talk with him about some of that stuff. But Nimrod was deified as Apollo by the Greeks and Osiris by the Egyptians, and he is considered to be the same spirit that's going to return to the earth in the last days as the Antichrist. As a matter of fact, that too is discussed in the Scriptures. 2 Thessalonians 2:3, the Apostle Paul warns the Thessalonians that the Antichrist will be the son of perdition, and that is the Greek term Apollyon, Apollo. In Revelation 17:8, again it says the beast will come up out of the bottomless pit and enter into perdition, and that Greek word is apollia, Apollyon, Apollo. So the belief is that the Bible identifies the same spirit that the ancient Greeks would have referred to as Apollo as the king of that bottomless pit. And right there where CERN was built, it was believed in Roman times that that is where this doorway might exist, out of which this destroyer demon is going to come, and CERN goes there and builds their collider, and they're telling us what the collider is. The director of CERN has done interviews in which he has said that they are trying there to open a gateway, a doorway. In fact, he said we may send something through the doorway, or something may come through the doorway into our reality. So pretty astonishing, really, when you think about what we are doing over there.
And, Brother Tom, you know, we're down to about 10, 15 minutes at the most right now, and I don't want to back you up too far, so whenever you have to cut out of here, you just let me know. I hit a timer when you said about 25 minutes. I grabbed my phone and I started hitting a timer because I don't want to mess up your schedule at all. You're extremely busy, and we're just so thankful you could be with us for a small moment of time here tonight. But just on an overall general viewpoint, as far as end times go right now, and you read the book of Revelation, and your understanding of the Bible is astounding to me. When you think about Bible prophecy, when you think about the end times, and when you think about where we are right now, how close is all this, Brother Tom, the return of the Lord, I mean, the rise of the Antichrist? What are you trekking with now? I hope you understand my question. It's like a general overview of what you're looking at, where you think we are on the prophetic timeline right now.
Well, again, you know, you mentioned that you were listening to a program the other day where I was talking about different things that I think that people ought to be watching for. I think maybe it was the 4 things or 5 things that I had listed that people ought to be watching for in 2015 that connect to this current Pope. I think that the Pope has put himself out there. I think that he definitely is one of the personalities that I myself am going to be watching. And why would that be true? Well, first of all, because any day now, this month, he is supposed to put forward an encyclical, which is a rare and important document, an authoritative document that is published by a pope, in which he provides moral guidance, but more than that, he speaks as the voice of God. It's kind of a vicarious filii Dei moment in which he is speaking as the voice of God on a moral issue. So this encyclical will be taken by all of the bishops around the world. It will be given to all of the, the over 1 billion Roman Catholics in the world, and it will become a mandate, something that they have to believe in and something that they have to aspire to or something that they have to promote. And the question is, what is this encyclical going to say? Now, we're going to find out, right away. We're going to find out in the next few days or this month, as I understand it. But even some of the conservative Catholics are very concerned about it. They want to know why the Pope has essentially stepped away from talking about theological issues and has taken up a political issue, an environmental issue. And we're going to have to just wait and see. But I do have some concerns about it because, first of all, he also is going to speak in front of the United Nations, which I think is kind of a tell about where this encyclical is going to come down in terms of its language. Because, in the United Nations, years ago, they adopted what a lot of people call Agenda 21 principles. Those are not mandatory for the member states, but they could become mandatory, especially if you have somebody like the Pope out there who is advocating for them. And the reason that I think the Pope might advocate certain Agenda 21 issues is because of the language he has used publicly, where he has used phrases like human ecology and your carbon footprint. So he seems to be borrowing from some of the very same language that was originally adopted by the United Nations. Now, why should we care about any of that? Well, because, this could become part of a totalitarianistic, even an antichrist kind of global government system. Agenda 21 issues, environmental issues, could take away your right to own private property. Even if you're allowed to own private property, it could restrict your use of that property, whether or not you could raise a garden, things like that, whether you could capture the rainwater off the top of your house to put it into a cistern so that you could use it for emergency uses. There are states already where people are fighting issues like that, but this originated with the United Nations Agenda 21 issues, but it could be even worse than that. Agenda 21 issues could limit how many children you're allowed to have, whether or not you're even allowed to have a car. And this goes back to some of the 1970s, 1980s issues that came out of the environmental movement, the Goddess Earth movement, the greening of the church and society, Al Gore and all that. I had a friend back in those days named Samantha Smith who wrote a couple of different books. One was called Goddess Earth. I forget what the other one was called. That were fairly heavy investigations into some of this language that was winding up in the United Nations. So I think that's one thing to watch right now. One other part of this whole environmental question, however, could be whether the Pope would include language that takes this from the greening of the church, environmental issues and Agenda 21 issues, to the issues of Gaia, divinity. Some of the oldest pagan religions in the world and all around the world, and from almost every major ancient culture, was this belief that the earth is actually a living, sentient being to whom we owe devotion. And so the earth itself was literally worshipped as an entity, and that we were to be at one, not just at one with this entity, but it was idolatrous. We were to worship the entity. So in Christian centers, we might say that Christians would certainly have a responsibility to be good stewards of the earth, but stewardship is entirely different than worshiping the earth. We would say we could be stewards of the earth, but all of our worship and devotion goes to God, who uses the earth perhaps as an instrument to bless us with things like food and things like that, but we would never worship the earth. We only give devotion to God, where in Gaiaism, that whole role is reversed. The earth literally becomes the mother of God, and these are things, of course, in Catholicism that can get quite confusing. So that's one thing I think we need to really watch out for, what's going to happen here this week, next week, when the Pope issues his encyclical. The second thing is he also has announced that he is this year going to call together a summit of all of the major religions of the world to work towards global unity. And that, too, is very prophetic, because I think that we're living in a time when a man of superior intelligence, wit, charm, diplomacy is going to appear on the world scene as a savior. And right now, this Pope has a 95% popularity rating. He's extraordinarily popular, more so than any man on the face of the earth today. He rates higher than everybody, including the presidents of nations. And he has something like a 70% popularity rating among evangelicals. So when this guy starts talking about calling all the major religions of the world together for purposes of global unity, you could literally be looking at the formation of a one-world church. And if I had time, I could describe how I think certain trigger events could work in favor of that would cause both the nations of the earth and the religious centers of the earth to temporarily at least lay down their differences and come together under one global umbrella. And I think this Pope would be right at the center of that. Very quickly, another thing, the Pope is not only going to address the United Nations, but he's also going to address a joint session of the United States Congress. This has never happened before. So we're literally talking about the merging of politics and religion, which I have believed all of my adult life is the platform on which the Antichrist will arrive. And then fourthly, there are conservative Catholics right now that are implying to me that this encyclical may include language that connects to what's called the many worlds theory. Now, this is a theory that is very much espoused by many of the Opus Dei level theologians in the Roman Catholic Church. It's what makes them talk about aliens, and we would accept them as our space brothers. A lot of that theology grows out of what's called many worlds. And if you might have seen the remake of that old movie, The Day the Earth Stood Still. The original version of that movie, the aliens come to the Earth because we're developing nuclear armament, and they want to warn us about that. But in the remake of that a couple of years ago with Keanu Reeves, the aliens come to the world to warn us that we are misusing Gaia, that we are abusing our power over the Earth. In other words, their message is humans are the disease, and we need to be eradicated for the welfare of the planet itself. And I'm being told by some of my Catholic insiders that might somehow be cleverly written into this encyclical, and it kind of opens the door for something else that I think this Pope is going to do, and that is sometime I don't think he's going to do it in this encyclical. I think he might make a statement in the encyclical that later this year, this is what I'm being told, later this year, he's going to publish another paper. It might be an encyclical. It might just be a dogma that is issued by the Pope, or even issued by the Pope's University in Rome, and it's something he endorses. But the bottom line is it's going to have to do with astrobiology. And here's what a lot of people don't know, is that Pope Francis, before he became a Jesuit, before he entered the ministry, he earned degrees in science. He had an interest in astrobiology. And furthermore, he's got a long-term relationship going all the way back to the state that he comes out of, with Jose Gabel Funes, who is the current leader of the VORG, the Vatican Observatory Research Group. And Jose Funes, Argentina was the word that I was looking for, Jose Funes recently, in an interview with the Catholic press, he said the Pope is dealing with all of the things that he has to deal with in the world right now, like ISIS and things like that. But he said very soon the Pope is going to turn his attention to the subject of astrobiology. Now, Jose Funes is the head of the Vatican Observatory Research Group, and he has been a friend, a personal friend, a close friend of Pope Francis for many, many years. So he's got inside information, and I'd love to know what made him say that to the Catholic press. But the research that Chris Putnam and I have been doing from Mount Graham, and then, of course, we had to go back to Mount Graham, and the book that we're going to be publishing, On the Path of the Immortals, takes us right back to the astronomers from the Vatican and Guy Consolmagno, who I've interviewed now 5 times from Rome, and they are preparing doctrine right now at the Pope's University that goes through a process of being accepted and then becoming church doctrine that is spooky, to say the least, my friend.
Well, I believe it, Brother Tom. And with that, we're almost at 8 to the top of the hour here. And, I was just looking at the headline that I researched a few days ago, talking about a mystery noise that could be an Earth-like world 22 light years away. And what I believe we're seeing is, in a general sense, is just soft disclosure, as Brother Marzulli likes to say. And at a certain point, we know that this thing is all going to reach a head. And that point seems to be right around the corner, doesn't it, Brother Tom?
Yeah, absolutely it does. And again, this is exactly what we're doing right now. When we came down off of Mount Graham, and it's hard to believe that this has been almost 24 months ago. And the whole process, by the way, that entire thing was preternatural. It was like supernatural. How Chris Putnam and I came together. We knew that if we were going to get to the bottom line, we were going to have to get to the top of Mount Graham. And people don't understand. You don't just get in a car and drive up to Mount Graham and say, we're here to see the aliens. I mean, this place is highly, highly guarded. Miles down the mountain from the observatory, there are huge fences with signs in various languages talking about all the terrible things they're going to do to you if you try to climb over that fence. So I negotiated that through the Arizona State University. We went to Mount Graham. We met with the Jesuit astronomer who was on duty that day. We saw all of the Vatican's advanced telescope. We saw the radio telescope. We saw the large binocular telescope. Spent the entire afternoon with the lead technician of the LBT, the Large Binocular Telescope. He showed us the Lucifer device. In fact, if you watch the trailer that advertises the book Exo Vaticana, you'll see us going up the elevator, 1 floor, 2 floor, 3 floor, 6 floors, all the way up to the 7th floor. Now we're way up above the top of the large binocular telescope, and you'll see a picture of the lead technician taking a laser pointer, pointing down in between those two gigantic twin mirrors. This is the largest telescope in the world. And he's pointing in between the two of them, and he says, "This is the Lucifer device." And, brother, I got to tell you, did I have a monstrous amount of emails for a while from people saying, what in the world are they talking about? What is the Vatican doing on the top of a mountain in Arizona using a device called the Lucifer device? Well, the answer comes from another Jesuit, Malachi Martin, who in 1997 told Art Bell on Coast to Coast AM, when Art Bell said, "Father, why is the Vatican on the top of that mountain studying deep space?" He said, "It's because at the highest levels of Vatican governance, they know what is approaching the earth and that it will be of the utmost importance in coming years." Well, I think we finally figured out exactly what it is they're doing. In fact, the Jesuit on duty that day, we have him on film telling us that they are monitoring something that is in deep space and that they're watching exo-worlds where they think that there could be the conditions for extraterrestrial intelligence. But it was when we came off of the mountain that we found out from the native tribes that joined the environmentalists and filed a federal lawsuit to try to stop the Vatican and NASA from going on the top of that mountain. They were the ones who told us what was really going on there. And at first, it was too mind-boggling to even conceive. But in our words, in our modern lingo, what they explained was Mount Graham is a portal. It's a stargate. And that's something to try to wrap your mind around. It's a place, a doorway, where other intelligence moves in and out of this reality. It's one of the 4 holiest mountains in the world to all indigenous American tribes for that very reason. And at first we thought, should we cue the Twilight Zone music now? What in the world are these guys talking about? But now we've spent 24 months, 2 film crews, tens of thousands of pages of research. We got doors open that have never been opened before, and we filmed things. People are hardly going to be able to. We filmed the denizens coming through the doorways. This is some spooky stuff, and we have it on film. But not just that, we got to the university levels among the professors of the tribes themselves. And finally, we got with a Cherokee guide who took us behind the locked gates of the reservation, took and pointed out to us, some stuff that people are absolutely, you're simply not going to believe the gazillions of dollars that they have spent preparing the largest kiva in the world for the fifth world, which is their version of the apocalypse, at where the nations, all of the Indian nations, are going to go when the Great Tribulation begins. It's absolutely astonishing. I've got to go, by the way. I think I'm being buzzed by my other show right now. Great to be on your program tonight. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much, Brother Tom. Look forward to having you again sometime in the future.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Ladies and